Authenticity matters when examining the law. What follows is a comprehensive look at real events, presenting unfiltered and unedited perspectives. Experience raw, unaltered footage directly from the front lines of justice, where every second carries profound consequences.
You know what I think, Bryce? I think she stole that suit too. Probably walked right out of Nordstrom with it.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Check the tags. Bet they're still on.
Look at her, stone quiet. That's the guilty look right there.
At 5:47 a.m., inside Reagan National Airport, the terminal was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the polished floors. A few early travelers shuffled toward security, coffee cups in hand, eyes still heavy with sleep. The checkpoint machines beeped in a steady rhythm. Nothing about the morning suggested anything unusual was about to happen. A black woman in her early 50s walked through the terminal with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of commanding courtrooms. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, perfectly pressed. Her carry-on rolled behind her in a smooth, practiced motion. Her posture was straight, her pace unhurried. She had done this walk 1,000 times. This was Judge Vivian Hartwell, a federal appeals court judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, appointed by the President of the United States 3 years earlier after a unanimous Senate confirmation. She had spent 18 years as a federal prosecutor before that, trying cases that put cartel leaders and corrupt politicians behind bars. She was traveling to Chicago for the National Judicial Conference, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on civil rights and judicial integrity. Her credentials were impeccable. Her reputation was spotless. She had dedicated her life to the law, to the belief that justice applied equally to everyone, regardless of who they were or what they looked like. But in the next 12 minutes, none of that would matter to the two officers who were already watching her from across the terminal. What they didn't realize was that their body cameras were recording every word, every action. Everything that was about to happen would be captured in high-definition video that would eventually reach the White House. Officer Bryce Kessler stood near the security checkpoint with his arms crossed, scanning the terminal the way a predator watches a watering hole. He was 44 years old, stocky, with a shaved head and a permanent scowl etched into his face. 16 years with the Reagan National Airport Police Department had taught him one thing: he could do whatever he wanted as long as he used the right words in his reports. His record should have ended his career years ago. 31 complaints over 14 years, racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation, harassment. Every single complaint had been reviewed by Internal Affairs and dismissed. Witnesses recanted. Victims stopped returning calls. Supervisors wrote phrases like unsubstantiated and insufficient evidence and filed the paperwork away where it would never see daylight. Kessler had learned the system. He knew that as long as he claimed someone was evasive or matched a description or exhibited suspicious behavior, no one would question him. His colleagues called him old school. Some of the younger officers admired him. Others quietly requested transfers after working a few shifts by his side. His partner that morning was Officer Danny Stokes, 29 years old, 5 years on the job. Stokes was tall and lean, with the eager energy of someone still trying to prove himself. He laughed at Kessler's jokes, nodded at his opinions, and never once questioned his calls. When Kessler moved, Stokes followed. When Kessler spoke, Stokes agreed. Kessler's eyes locked onto a figure moving through the terminal, a black woman in an expensive suit, walking like she owned the place. Something about her bothered him. The confidence, the posture, the way she didn't look down when she passed. He nudged Stokes with his elbow. "Watch this one." Judge Hartwell had already cleared security and was walking toward Gate 23 when she heard the voice behind her. "Ma'am, stop right there." She stopped. She turned slowly, her carry-on coming to rest beside her. 2 airport police officers were approaching, one older with a shaved head, the other younger and trailing slightly behind. The older one had his hand resting on his duty belt, fingers inches from his weapon. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was calm, measured, the same tone she used when attorneys in her courtroom tried to grandstand. Kessler stepped closer than necessary. His eyes moved over her suit, her jewelry, her confident posture. Something about her irritated him in a way he couldn't articulate. A black woman moving through his terminal like she had every right to be there, dressed like she was somebody important, looking him in the eye like they were equals. "You fit a description," he said. "We had a theft reported earlier this morning, someone matching your appearance." Hartwell's expression didn't change. "I'm a federal judge with the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm traveling to Chicago on official judicial business. I've been through security and I'm heading to my gate." Kessler's lips curled into a smirk, the kind of smirk that said he had heard every excuse, every lie, every desperate attempt to talk out of trouble. "Sure you are." Stokes shifted his weight behind his partner, positioning himself to block her path forward. A businessman nearby slowed his pace, watching. A young woman at a coffee kiosk looked up from her phone. Kessler's body camera blinked red on his chest, recording everything. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Kessler's voice carried the flat authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. Judge Hartwell took a slow breath. She had handled hostile witnesses, violent defendants, attorneys who screamed objections across her courtroom. She knew how to stay calm when others wanted her to break. "I'm going to reach into my bag for my credentials," she said clearly. "I'm moving slowly so there's no misunderstanding." She unzipped the front pocket of her carry-on and retrieved a leather folder. Inside was her federal judicial identification card issued by the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, her state bar card from when she practiced law, her official travel itinerary showing the conference in Chicago and her role as keynote speaker. She handed them to Kessler. He looked at the judicial ID for less than 3 seconds. He flipped the bar card over like it was a grocery store receipt. He didn't bother reading the itinerary. "These could be fake," he said, tossing the folder back toward her. It hit her chest and fell to the floor. "Anyone can print stuff like this. Doesn't prove anything." Stokes nodded. "We see fake IDs all the time." Hartwell bent down slowly and picked up her credentials. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Officer, I am a sitting federal appeals court judge appointed by the President of the United States. You can verify my identity with one phone call to the U.S. Marshal's Service or the Fourth Circuit Clerk's office." Kessler stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I'll verify what I want to verify," he said. "Now turn around." Kessler didn't step back. He stepped forward. He was close enough now that Judge Hartwell could see the veins in his neck, the flush of anger creeping up from his collar. His breath came in short, controlled bursts. The mask of professional detachment was slipping, revealing something uglier underneath. "People like you," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to carry, "think a fancy suit means you're above the law. Think you can walk through here like you own the place, like the rules don't apply to you." Hartwell met his eyes without flinching. "I'd like your badge number, officer, and the name of your supervisor." Kessler didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge the request. His hand moved to his cuffs. Stokes shifted to the right, closing off any path she might have taken to walk away. His hand hovered near his belt. His eyes darted between Hartwell and the growing number of travelers who had stopped to watch. A white businessman in a navy blazer stood frozen near the window, his rolling bag forgotten beside him. A young woman in her 20s had her phone raised, camera pointed directly at the confrontation. A mother pulled her child closer and backed away slowly. Kessler noticed the phone. "Put that away," he barked at the young woman. "This is official police business. You're interfering with an investigation." The woman hesitated but didn't lower her phone. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept recording. Kessler turned back to Hartwell. His jaw was tight. His patience was gone. Whatever restraint he had maintained was evaporating in real time, captured frame by frame on body cameras and civilian phones that would soon be seen by millions. "Last chance," he said. "Turn around. Now." Judge Hartwell spoke slowly and clearly, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I am not resisting. I am complying with your instructions. But I am also telling you, officer, that you are making a serious mistake. I am a federal judge. This will not end the way you think it will." Something in Kessler's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, his nostrils flared. It was the look of a man who had never been challenged by someone he considered beneath him and who refused to tolerate it now. He grabbed her right arm and wrenched it behind her back. The motion was violent, sudden, and completely unnecessary. Before she could react, his other hand slammed into her upper back, driving her forward and down. Judge Vivian Hartwell hit the terminal floor face first. The sound was sickening, a dull crack followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. Her glasses flew from her face and skidded across the tile, one lens shattering into pieces. Her carry-on tipped over. Her briefcase burst open, scattering legal documents and a garment bag containing her judicial robe across the polished floor. Stokes dropped immediately, driving his knee into the center of her back. "Stop resisting," he shouted. "Stop resisting," Kessler echoed, pinning her wrists together behind her. She was not resisting. She was 52 years old. She weighed 140 pounds. She lay completely still, her cheek pressed against the cold tile, blood beginning to trickle from a gash above her eyebrow where her face had struck the ground. 6 civilian phones recorded every second. 2 body cameras captured every angle. The red lights blinked silently, preserving what would become the most damning footage of police brutality the country had seen in years. For a moment, the terminal was silent. Then the reactions came all at once. The white businessman in the navy blazer stepped forward, his face twisted with disbelief. "That's a federal judge," he shouted, pointing at the scattered credentials on the floor. "What the hell are you doing? She showed you her ID." A black woman standing near the coffee kiosk had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. She shook her head slowly, unable to speak, watching a nightmare unfold in real time. An elderly man in a worn Navy veteran's cap pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. His voice was hoarse but steady. "You're assaulting her. She didn't do anything. I watched the whole thing. She was cooperating." Kessler's head snapped toward him. "Sir, back off. Now. This is a police matter. Everyone needs to clear the area." No one moved. Stokes pulled Hartwell's wrists together and snapped the handcuffs into place. The metal clicked with a cold finality. She lay motionless on the tile, blood pooling slowly beneath the gash above her eyebrow. Her charcoal suit was torn at the shoulder. Her judicial robe spilled out of its garment bag like evidence at a crime scene. She said nothing. Not a word of protest. Not a cry of pain. Not a single plea for help. Years of training had taught her this moment. As a prosecutor, she had prepared witnesses for hostile cross-examinations. As a judge, she had watched defendants destroy their own cases by talking too much. She knew that everything happening right now was being recorded. The body cameras, the phones, the witnesses who would later testify. Her silence was her weapon, and it would prove more devastating than anything she could have said. Lieutenant Cheryl Davenport heard the commotion on her radio before she saw it. Dispatch had called it a disturbance near Gate 23. But the voices crackling through the channel told a different story. Shouting, angry witnesses, something about excessive force. She moved quickly through the terminal, her hand resting on her radio, her instincts telling her this was about to become a very long day. She arrived in under 4 minutes. The scene stopped her cold. A black woman lay on the ground in handcuffs, her face bloodied, her suit torn, surrounded by scattered documents and a garment bag. A crowd of angry travelers stood in a semicircle, phones raised, voices overlapping with accusations and demands. Kessler stood over the woman with his arms crossed, his jaw set in defiance. Stokes hovered nearby, looking nervous for the first time. "What happened here?" Davenport demanded. Kessler answered without hesitation. "Suspicious individual. She was evasive during questioning, became verbally aggressive, and refused to comply with lawful commands. She resisted when I attempted to detain her." Davenport looked at the woman on the ground, then at the crowd, then at the documents scattered across the tile. A leather folder lay open near her foot. She bent down and picked it up. Inside was a federal judicial identification card. The photo matched the bloodied face on the floor. The name read, Vivian Hartwell. The title read, United States Circuit Judge, 4th Circuit Court of Appeals. Davenport's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks so completely that Stokes took a step back. "Bryce," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you know who this is?" Kessler blinked. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, but the faintest shadow of doubt. It was already far too late. Lieutenant Davenport stepped away from the scene, her hand trembling as she raised her radio. She switched to a private channel and called Captain William Driscoll, the commanding officer on duty. "Captain, we have a situation at Gate 23. A federal judge has been detained and injured by 2 of our officers. I need you here now." Driscoll arrived in 3 minutes. One look at the scene and he was on his phone. His first call went to the airport authority director. The director listened for less than 30 seconds before interrupting. "A federal judge? Are you absolutely certain?" He was calling the Department of Justice liaison before Driscoll finished answering. The DOJ liaison, a career attorney who had handled sensitive cases for 15 years, made one call of his own. It went directly to the White House counsel's office. 12 minutes. That was all it took. 12 minutes from the moment Judge Vivian Hartwell's face hit the terminal floor to the moment the White House learned that a sitting federal appeals court judge, appointed by the president himself, had been slammed to the ground and handcuffed by airport police while traveling on official business. The president was briefed within the hour. By mid-morning, the DOJ Civil Rights Division had been activated. FBI agents were dispatched to Reagan National to secure all evidence. Federal marshals arrived to ensure Judge Hartwell received immediate medical attention and protection. The airport police department was ordered to preserve all body camera footage, radio transmissions, and incident reports. Kessler and Stokes were separated and placed in different rooms. Their badges were confiscated, their weapons were taken. This was no longer a local matter. This was no longer an internal affairs review. This was a federal case, and it was moving faster than anyone at Reagan National had ever seen. The FBI evidence team pulled the body camera footage within 2 hours of the incident. Kessler's camera had recorded everything from the moment he first spotted Judge Hartwell walking through the terminal. Stokes's camera captured the secondary angles, the positioning, the moments his partner's camera missed. Together, they provided a complete, uninterrupted record of the entire encounter. Federal prosecutors gathered in a secure conference room at the DOJ building to review the footage. No one spoke as it played. They watched Hartwell stop when commanded. They watched her calmly identify herself as a federal judge. They watched her slowly retrieve her credentials, announce every movement, and hand over documents that clearly established who she was. They watched Kessler glance at her federal judicial ID for less than 3 seconds before throwing it back at her chest. They heard him say, "People like you think a fancy suit means you're above the law." They watched him step closer, watched her request his badge number, watched him ignore her completely. And then they heard him say, just before he grabbed her arm, "I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You don't talk to me like that." The slam was brutal. The sound of her face hitting the tile made one of the junior attorneys look away. The image of Stokes driving his knee into her back while shouting, "Stop resisting." At a motionless 5-2, old woman drew a sharp exhale from across the room. There was no ambiguity. There was no alternative interpretation. There was no other side to consider. When the footage ended, the room was silent for a long moment. A senior prosecutor, a man who had spent 2 decades handling civil rights cases, finally spoke. "That," he said quietly, "is the clearest case of civil rights violation I've seen in 20 years. The FBI and DOJ didn't just investigate the incident, they investigated the man. Within 48 hours, a team of federal agents had pulled every complaint ever filed against Officer Bryce Kessler. 31 complaints over 14 years. Each one had been reviewed by Internal Affairs. Each one had been dismissed, filed away, forgotten. But now, under federal scrutiny, the patterns that had been ignored for over a decade became impossible to deny. 14 of Kessler's prior victims agreed to be re-interviewed. Every single one was Black or Latino. Their stories were nearly identical, stopped for no reason, accused of fitting a description. Demands for identification, followed by dismissive responses when credentials were provided. Threats of arrest. physical intimidation. In 4 cases, handcuffs. In 2 cases, injuries that required medical attention. None of them had been charged with any crime. None of them had done anything wrong. Investigators subpoenaed internal emails from the airport police department. What they found was damning. Supervisors had known about Kessler's behavior for years. Complaints had been flagged, discussed in meetings, and deliberately minimized. One email from a former captain, dated 3 years earlier, was particularly devastating. It read, "Kessler's aggressive, but he gets results. The complaints are from the usual suspects. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." The usual suspects. The phrase echoed through the federal investigation like a confession. The cover-up wasn't one rogue officer protecting himself. It was institutional. Supervisors had enabled Kessler. Internal affairs had cleared him. The system had protected him at every turn, allowing him to target minorities for 14 years without consequence. Until now. The president's statement was released at 4 p.m. Eastern, less than 10 hours after the assault. It was brief, direct, and left no room for interpretation. The assault on Judge Vivian Hartwell is an affront to the rule of law and to the principles this nation was founded upon. A sitting federal judge was attacked by those sworn to protect the public. This administration will ensure full accountability for everyone involved. 2. Within the hour, the Attorney General held a press conference on the steps of the Department of Justice. Her words were measured but firm. The DOJ has opened a federal civil rights investigation into the Reagan National Airport Police Department. We will examine not only the actions of the officers involved in this incident, but the institutional failures that allowed a pattern of discriminatory enforcement to persist for over a decade. The Secretary of Homeland Security, whose department coordinated with airport police agencies nationwide, issued a directive demanding an immediate review of use-of-force policies and complaint handling procedures at every airport police department in the country. What happened at Reagan National cannot be treated as an isolated incident, the statement read. We must examine whether similar failures exist elsewhere. At the daily White House press briefing, reporters fired questions about the administration's response. The press secretary stood at the podium, her expression grave. "Let me be clear," she said. "An attack on a federal judge is an attack on the judiciary itself. It is an attack on the constitutional separation of powers. It is an attack on the foundation of our democracy. There will be accountability, there will be consequences, and this administration will not rest until justice is served." Behind closed doors, the message was even more direct. Careers would end, prosecutions would follow, no one would be protected. The consequences came faster than anyone at Reagan National had ever seen. Officer Bryce Kessler was arrested 3 days after the incident. Federal agents took him into custody at his home at 6 a.m., placing him in handcuffs in his own driveway while neighbors watched from their windows. He was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, assault of a federal official, and filing a false police report. His law enforcement certification was revoked before the end of the week. At his arraignment, prosecutors argued that Kessler was a flight risk and a danger to the community. They cited his history of violence, his pattern of targeting minorities, and the severity of the charges. The judge agreed. Bail was denied. Bryce Kessler, who had spent 16 years believing he was untouchable, was led out of the courtroom in shackles. Officer Danny Stokes was arrested the same morning. He was charged with conspiracy to deprive civil rights and failure to intervene during the commission of a federal crime. His 5 years of following Kessler's lead without question had finally caught up with him. But the destruction didn't stop with the officers. 3 supervisors were fired within 2 weeks, including Captain Raymond Vogel, the man whose email had dismissed complaints against Kessler as coming from the usual suspects. The airport police chief, facing mounting pressure from federal investigators and the media, submitted his resignation. The Airport Authority Board, which had overseen the department for years without addressing systemic failures, was dissolved by order of the City Council and reconstituted with entirely new members. The Department of Justice imposed a federal consent decree on the Reagan National Airport Police Department. Independent monitors would oversee all operations. New use-of-force policies were mandated. Body camera compliance would be reviewed weekly. Complaint handling procedures were completely restructured. 16 years of institutional protection had collapsed in less than a month. The federal trial of Bryce Kessler began on a cold Monday morning in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every available seat. The gallery included civil rights attorneys, law enforcement officials, and members of Congress who had traveled to witness the proceedings. On the first day, prosecutors played the body camera footage. The courtroom was silent as Kessler's own camera showed him approaching Judge Hartwell. They watched him dismiss her credentials. They heard him say, "People like you, and I don't care if you're the Queen of England." They watched him grab her arm and drive her face into the tile. They heard Stokes shout, "Stop resisting," at a motionless woman. Several jurors looked away. One wiped her eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, 14 prior victims took the stand. One by one, they described encounters that mirrored what had happened to Judge Hartwell. The stops without cause, the fabricated justifications, the threats, the humiliation, a pattern stretching back over a decade, exposed in devastating detail. Judge Vivian Hartwell testified on the 8th day. She wore a dark suit and simple glasses to replace the ones that had shattered on the terminal floor. Her voice was calm, precise, and unwavering. She recounted every moment of the assault, every word Kessler had spoken, every second she had spent lying on the cold tile with a knee in her back and blood running down her face. Kessler's defense was simple. He had followed protocol and felt threatened by Hartwell's demeanor. The video evidence destroyed that argument before it could gain traction. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Bryce Kessler was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Danny Stokes, who had cooperated with investigators, received 3 years. The supervisors who had enabled Kessler's behavior for over a decade faced their own trials in the months that followed. 6 weeks after her face hit the terminal floor at Reagan National Airport, Judge Vivian Hartwell returned to the bench. The gash above her eyebrow had healed into a thin scar that she made no effort to hide. She walked into her courtroom in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals with the same quiet authority she had carried through that terminal on the morning everything changed. Her clerk stood as she entered. The attorneys present fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then she took her seat and called the first case. The judicial conference in Chicago had been postponed, but not canceled. 3 weeks after her return to the bench, Judge Hartwell delivered her keynote address via video link from her chambers. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. She spoke about accountability, about the justice system's obligation to protect everyone equally, regardless of who they are or what they look like, about the courage of the witnesses who had raised their phones and refused to look away, about the body cameras that had captured the truth when lies might have prevailed. Justice is not a guarantee, she said. It is a responsibility. It requires vigilance. It requires courage. And it requires all of us citizens, officers, judges to hold ourselves and each other accountable. She did not seek the spotlight. She gave no interviews. She declined book deals and speaking offers that would have made her wealthy. But her case became a landmark nonetheless. Body camera footage, civilian recordings, and institutional accountability had combined to deliver something rare: actual consequences. The civil settlement was reached 4 months after the incident. The Reagan National Airport Authority agreed to pay $4.2 million to Judge Hartwell, along with a formal public apology and a commitment to implement every reform demanded by the federal consent decree. In Congress, a bipartisan group of legislators introduced the Hartwell Reform Act, mandating federal oversight of airport police departments, standardized use-of-force policies, and independent review of all complaints alleging racial profiling or discrimination. The bill passed the House within 6 months. In her chambers, Judge Hartwell kept one item from the incident. Her shattered glasses, the frames bent and one lens missing, were mounted in a simple black frame on her desk. Visitors sometimes asked about them. She always gave the same answer. A reminder, she would say, that justice, though sometimes broken, can be repaired. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.
Every story has two sides, but the truth remains singular. We are here to hold power to account, letting verified records do the talking. The documents simply do not lie. Thanks for watching and supporting independent media.